Fitzwilliam Darcy had imagined, in the privacy of his own mind, many possible consequences of speaking to Elizabeth Bennet. He had imagined surprise. He had imagined confusion. He had imagined, with a severity he now found almost laughable in its arrogance, that she would require time to recover from the astonishment of such an offer. He had even imagined gratitude, though he would have denied that word had any man accused him of it. He had not imagined hatred, not the loud, vulgar hatred of those who did not know how to govern their expressions, but the contained, intelligent, wounded kind that had looked upon him with bright eyes and a steady voice and told him that his conduct had not been that of a gentleman. The words had followed him from the parsonage to Rosings. They had followed him up the stairs, through the passage, into the room assigned to him, and now stood about him like witnesses, not that of a gentleman. Darcy had taken no supper. He had not wanted wine, nor cards, nor Colonel Fitzwilliam's company, nor the immense and exhausting confidence of Lady Catherine, who spoke as though every chamber in Rosings existed to preserve her opinion from contradiction. He had escaped with a headache as his excuse, though no pain in his head could rival the one Elizabeth Bennet had left in his pride. He had been refused. No, worse. He had been judged. Darcy stood before the cold hearth of his bedchamber, with one hand resting upon the mantel and the other clenched behind his back. A servant had laid the fire earlier, but Darcy had dismissed him before it was lit. He wanted no comfort. Comfort suggested injury, and injury suggested that he, rather than she, had been wronged. He had been wronged in one sense only. She had believed Wickham. At that thought, his blood rose. George Wickham, with his agreeable address and practised grievance, had succeeded where Darcy's fortune, character, and consequence had failed. Wickham had been believed. Darcy had been despised. But even that indignation would not steady him for long, because her other charges could not be dismissed so easily. Jane Bennet. His hand tightened on the mantel. He had acted there from judgment. He had seen Bingley's openness, Miss Bennet's serenity, the vulgar triumph of Mrs. Bennet, and the indiscretion of the younger sisters. He had believed himself preserving his friend from an unequal and imprudent attachment. He had believed, too, that Miss Bennet's heart was not engaged. It had been an opinion, not a certainty. A gentleman did not ruin a woman's happiness upon an opinion, and then call it friendship. Darcy turned from the hearth and walked the length of the room. The carpet swallowed his steps, which irritated him. Some part of him wanted sound, proof that he was not merely pacing inside his own condemnation. He had told Elizabeth the truth about her family's situation, with a frankness he had thought noble. He had believed it honest to confess the struggle, the degradation, the objections he had conquered. Now the same speech returned to him, stripped of all nobility. It had been a proposal that asked a woman to be grateful for being loved against his better judgment. No wonder she had refused him. No wonder her face had gone white with anger before the colour returned. Darcy stopped at the writing table. His letter-case lay open, though he had no memory of opening it. A sheet of paper waited before him, pale and accusing. He took up the pen and put it down again. What could he write? Madam, you have misunderstood me. No, she had understood him too well. Madam, Wickham is a liar. True, but insufficient. The truth about Wickham could not be explained without Georgiana, and Georgiana's name must not be made the subject of any woman's distress, however deserving that woman might be of truth. Miss Bennet, I ask leave to defend myself against charges which— He broke off the sentence in his mind. Ask leave. She would not grant it. She had dismissed him. She had earned that right, for he had not offered her respect before he offered her his hand. Darcy dropped into the chair and drew the paper closer. Pride wished to wait. Honour demanded he write. Love, he recoiled from the word, even alone, would not let him leave her believing Wickham. He began. Be not alarmed, madam, on receiving this letter. The opening displeased him the moment it appeared. It sounded too composed for a man whose mind was in ruins, yet too much feeling would offend her, too little would confirm her judgment. Every sentence stood before him, like a servant awaiting orders from a master who no longer trusted his own command. He wrote of Bingley. He wrote of Wickham. He stopped before Georgiana, rose, crossed the room, returned, and forced himself to continue. Not the whole of the truth, perhaps, but enough. Enough to prove Wickham's character. Enough to explain why Darcy had not spoken sooner. Enough to give Elizabeth Bennet reason to doubt the man she had believed. It was past midnight when he sanded the pages. It was not a good letter. It was proud where he wished it plain, injured where he wished it just, cold where he wished it honourable. It was, however, more honest than the speech he had made at the parsonage. He folded it, sealed it, and set it beside the candle. Outside, wind stirred against the glass. Darcy looked toward the window. The night had been unsettled all evening, clouds gathering over Rosings with a heaviness that promised rain. In the dark reflection of the pane he saw a man he scarcely recognised. Heir, master, nephew, guardian, and fool. He had meant to leave Kent as soon as civility allowed. Now he could not depart until the letter had been delivered. He must see her once more, if only long enough to place truth in her hand and accept whatever contempt remained. He should sleep. Instead he took up the letter and stood with it for some time, turning it once between his fingers. The seal was firm, the matter was decided. Yet decision did not bring peace. Toward dawn he opened the window for air. The wind entered cold and damp, carrying the smell of spring earth and rain not yet fallen. Somewhere beyond the ordered gardens and the dark sweep of the park lay the parsonage, small and respectable, and now unbearable to think of, because she was there, Elizabeth Bennet, who had refused him, Elizabeth Bennet, who had been right. The first low mutter of thunder sounded far off, so distant it might have been no more than a carriage crossing stone. Darcy closed the window. He placed the letter inside his coat. By morning, he told himself, he would find a way to give it to her. By morning he would begin to repair what could be repaired. He did not know, as he extinguished the candle and stood in the grey half-light, that morning would not grant him the simple dignity of a letter. It would demand much more. Elizabeth Bennet had always believed anger to be a useful emotion when properly governed. It sharpened the mind, corrected foolish tenderness, and prevented one from mistaking civility for virtue. She had relied upon it before, sometimes with pleasure. There was comfort in disliking a person thoroughly when the evidence supported the conclusion. That night, anger gave her no comfort at all. She had slept little. The narrow bed in the room Charlotte had given her seemed to have acquired ridges and hollows in the dark, as though even the mattress wished to argue. Elizabeth turned again, sat up, lay down, drew the counterpane to her chin, threw it aside, and finally rose before the household had stirred. The room was pale with early light. Her gown lay over the chair where she had left it. Her gloves rested beside a book she had opened the previous evening and not read. The ordinary objects of her visit looked altered now, not because they had changed, but because she had. Mr. Darcy loved her. The absurdity of it might have made her laugh had it not been so insulting. He loved her against his reason, against his family, against her family, against every opinion he had ever permitted his proud countenance to express. He had loved her as one might confess to an illness and expect admiration for having survived it. He had offered marriage with the air of a man laying a costly sacrifice at her feet, and had seemed astonished when she declined to kneel before it. Elizabeth pressed her fingers to her temples. It was not merely his pride that wounded her. Pride she had long expected from him. He wore it as naturally as his coat. It was that he had thought her so capable of accepting humiliation when gilded with consequence. Had he imagined that Pemberley would sweeten every insult, that 10,000 a year would make her forget Jane's tears, that a great house and a great name would compensate for being told she was loved, despite every objection that attached to her birth? No. She would not think of Pemberley. She would think of Jane. At once her anger gained steadier ground. Jane, who had loved Mr. Bingley with all the gentle constancy of her nature. Jane, who had returned from Netherfield pale and quiet, and had then gone to London with hope so timid it scarcely dared call itself hope. Jane, whose disappointment Mr. Darcy had helped engineer and then defended as prudence. Elizabeth moved to the window and pushed the curtain aside. The parsonage garden was wet with dew, its beds obedient and modest. A little kingdom arranged according to Mr. Collins's ideas of importance. Beyond it, the lane bent toward Rosings, and the park rose in gentle undulation beneath a sky already thickening with cloud. She had no desire to look toward Rosings. Unfortunately, every direction in Hunsford seemed to know Lady Catherine's house existed, and to arrange itself accordingly. A soft knock came at the door. Elizabeth started, then drew the shawl tighter about her shoulders. "Come in." Charlotte entered quietly, carrying the attentive expression of a woman who had learned by marriage to observe disturbances before they became inconveniences. Her cap was neat, her gown plain, her face composed, yet Elizabeth detected concern in the small pause she made upon crossing the threshold. "You are up early," Charlotte said. "So are you. I have a husband who believes early rising to be a clerical virtue when it is performed by others." Charlotte's smile was slight. "I heard you moving." Elizabeth turned back to the window. "I am sorry if I disturbed you." "You did not disturb me. You concerned me." There was such kindness in the words that Elizabeth nearly lost the hard composure she had been cultivating since midnight. She could not tell Charlotte everything. To tell of Darcy's proposal would be to invite questions she could not endure, and perhaps obligations Charlotte, as Mrs. Collins, could not safely keep from her husband. Yet silence felt almost dishonest in the face of friendship. "I had a restless night," Elizabeth said. "That much I guessed." Charlotte came to stand beside her. "Was it Lady Catherine?" Elizabeth almost laughed. "For once, no." "Then it is serious." Despite herself, Elizabeth smiled. "I did not say so." "You did not need to." Charlotte studied her a moment, not intrusively, but with the practical tenderness that had made their friendship possible even when their choices differed. "Lizzie, if something has happened, nothing has happened that must trouble you." It was a poor answer, and Charlotte knew it. "Must is a convenient word," Charlotte replied. "It excuses many omissions." Elizabeth let the curtain fall. "You have become very philosophical in marriage." "I have become very attentive to what is not said." "Njai muom," offered without bitterness, pierced more deeply than complaint might have done. Elizabeth looked at her friend and saw, not for the first time, the cost of prudence. Charlotte had chosen a secure home, a respectable situation, and a husband whose absurdities could be managed if one arranged one's day carefully enough. Elizabeth had never despised her for it. She had only been unable to imagine making such a bargain herself. Last night, Mr. Darcy had offered another sort of bargain. Elevation at the price of humiliation. No, not a bargain. An insult dressed in marriage. "You need not fear for me," Elizabeth said, more gently. "I am only tired and out of humour. A walk will cure me." Charlotte looked toward the sky. "Not today, I think." "It is not raining." "It intends to." "Then I shall not go far." Before Charlotte could answer, footsteps sounded in the passage with an energy that belonged to no one in the house but Mr. Collins when he believed himself required. The door, which Charlotte had left partly open, admitted him a moment later after the smallest possible tap. Insufficient for permission, but ample for ceremony. "My dear Mrs. Collins," he began, and then, seeing Elizabeth, expanded his bow. "Cousin Elizabeth, I trust the morning finds you improved in spirits and suitably sensible of the many advantages of your present situation." Elizabeth's brows rose. "My present situation?" "Your visit, cousin, your visit, to be under the protection of my roof, so near Rosings Park, with the honour, indeed the condescension, of Lady Catherine's notice. Many young ladies would derive from such circumstances a great instruction in propriety." Charlotte's eyes lowered. Elizabeth suspected it was not reverence that moved them. "I shall endeavour to learn all I can," Elizabeth said. Mr. Collins received this with satisfaction. "A most proper sentiment. I was saying only yesterday to my dear Charlotte that a young woman cannot be too cautious in her conduct, particularly when away from the immediate governance of her parents. The world, cousin, is watchful. Lady Catherine has often remarked that reputation, once cracked, cannot be repaired by any common means." Elizabeth felt the words more sharply than he deserved. How fortunate that Lady Catherine has opinions enough to preserve the whole kingdom. Mr. Collins blinked, uncertain whether he had been praised. Charlotte moved at once. "My dear, breakfast will be wanted soon." Yes, of course." He drew himself up. "Cousin Elizabeth, I hope we shall have the pleasure of your company. Lady Catherine spoke last evening of young ladies who wander too freely in the park and become, through a lack of proper guidance, objects of remark. I am persuaded she had no particular person in mind. That Lady Catherine had every particular person in mind did not require saying." "I am grateful for the warning," Elizabeth replied. Mr. Collins bowed again and withdrew, having distributed morality and inconvenience in equal measure. When his footsteps had faded, Charlotte closed the door. "Lizzie," she said, "do not walk today." Elizabeth knew Charlotte's concern was affectionate. She knew, too, that her own desire to walk was half defiance and half flight. The sensible course would be to remain at the parsonage, sew badly, listen to Mr. Collins's account of Lady Catherine's poultry, and think of Darcy's proposal until she went mad. "I shall wait until after breakfast," she said. That was not agreement. No, it was compromise. Charlotte sighed, but she did not press further. Perhaps she understood that Elizabeth needed air in order to keep from speaking. Perhaps she had made too many compromises of her own to mistake restlessness for mere whim. Breakfast was a trial of ordinary things. Mr. Collins talked of Rosings. Charlotte poured tea. Elizabeth answered when addressed, smiled when necessary, and felt every minute stretch under the weight of words she could not utter. Once Mr. Collins departed to attend to parish matters, after explaining them at length to those who had not asked. Elizabeth took up her bonnet. Charlotte met her in the passage. "The clouds are worse," she said. "Then I shall walk only to the edge of the park and back. I wish you would take the maid." "I want solitude, Charlotte." Charlotte's expression softened at that. "I know." For a moment Elizabeth thought her friend might ask again what had happened. Instead, Charlotte reached to straighten the ribbon of Elizabeth's bonnet, a small, sisterly gesture that nearly undid her. "Then be prudent," Charlotte said. "And if it rains, return at once." "I shall." Elizabeth meant it when she said it. She could not have known how little such intentions mattered once the sky made up its mind. Chapter 2. The air outside the parsonage struck Elizabeth as a reprieve. It was cold for April, damp about the edges, and restless in a way that tugged at ribbons and hems. But it was not a drawing room, not Rosings, not the room where she had lain awake hearing Mr. Darcy's voice repeat its astonishing offences. She walked quickly at first, as though speed might carry her beyond thought. The lane was soft from earlier rain, and small stones pressed unevenly beneath her half-boots. She avoided the direct path toward Rosings and took instead a narrower way that skirted the park's edge before entering a belt of trees. It was a route she had used before, though not often and never so late in the morning. That difference pleased her. Habit, she felt, had betrayed her. Had she not walked at Rosings, she might never have encountered Colonel Fitzwilliam. Had she not conversed with him, she might not have heard of Darcy's interference with Bingley. Had she not heard that, she might have received Darcy's proposal with astonishment only, not rage. No, that was unjust. The rage would have come regardless. It had been waiting in every proud glance he had given at Hertfordshire, every silence that condemned her family, without the courtesy of speech. The wind rose as she entered the trees. Elizabeth drew her shawl closer. Charlotte had been right that the weather threatened rain. The sky, glimpsed in pieces through branches newly touched with green, had darkened from pearl to iron. Still, she pressed on. She would not go far. She wanted only enough solitude to arrange her mind into something like order, yet order would not come. A woman loved by Mr. Darcy ought, by all the rules of vanity, to feel triumph. Elizabeth felt none. His attachment, if attachment it was, had brought no pleasure, because he had not offered it as a man made humble by feeling. He had offered it as a man defeated by feeling, and half resentful of the victor. What a strange creature pride was. It could kneel and remain standing. She stopped at that thought, struck by it despite herself, and looked back along the path. The parsonage was no longer visible. The trees stood close behind her, bare lower branches interlacing with new growth, the ground beneath them mottled with last year's leaves and this year's mud. A low sound rolled over the park. Thunder. Elizabeth considered turning back. The sensible thing would be to do so. But the thunder was distant, and the very idea of returning so soon to Mr. Collins's vigilance and Charlotte's worried eyes felt unbearable. She would walk only to the old keeper's track, she decided, and then turn. The path there was familiar enough, and if rain began she could make her way back quickly. Her pace slowed as the ground rose. From the slight elevation she could see, between trees, the pale stone of Rosings in the distance. It looked impervious to weather, opinion, and humility. Elizabeth wondered whether Mr. Darcy was there now. Perhaps he had slept well. Perhaps men who offered insulting proposals and were refused did not suffer any lasting disturbance. Perhaps he was already considering how fortunate he had been to escape a connection with the Bennets. The thought stung, though it should not have done. She turned away from the view and continued deeper along the track. Darcy, at that same hour, was not at Rosings. He had left the house with the letter in his coat and no settled plan beyond the necessity of placing it in Elizabeth's hand. He had hoped to encounter her on one of her usual walks, though after the previous evening he had no right to hope for anything from her habits. When she did not appear on the path where he expected her, he walked farther than intended, his mind divided between prudence and compulsion. He should have sent the letter by a servant. No, impossible. A servant might lose it, read it, deliver it to Mrs. Collins, or worse, to Mr. Collins. He should have waited until church, except he could not endure that delay. He should have abandoned Kent altogether, except honour forbade departure while she believed Wickham injured by him and Jane, separated through his cruelty alone. The wind pressed against him as he crossed from the gravelled walk to a rougher path near the woods. He looked up. The sky was worsening. A sensible man would return, Darcy continued. He saw no one for some time. Twice he thought he heard movement and found only branches knocking against one another. Once he paused, took the letter from his coat, and considered whether the act of writing might already be presumption. She had not asked for his defence, she had refused his company. To force his explanation upon her would be another kind of arrogance. Yet to leave Wickham's falsehood unchallenged would expose Georgiana to the consequences of his silence, and leave Elizabeth to judge from lies. He replaced the letter. The first drops of rain began almost gently. They marked the path in dark spots, scattered and sparse. Elizabeth, some distance away, felt one land upon her glove and looked up with a frown. "Very well," she said aloud to no one. "I am warned." Rivened, she turned back. The path she had taken looked different from the opposite direction. Trees that had seemed merely picturesque now stood close and indistinct beneath the darkened sky. The wind had grown stronger. Leaves shivered and turned their pale undersides outward. The scattered drops became a steadier ticking upon branches, then a whisper, then a rushing sound that seemed to approach before it arrived. Within minutes the rain was falling hard. Elizabeth quickened her pace. Mud clung to the edges of her hem. A gust seized at her bonnet, and she lifted a hand to keep it in place. The path dipped where she had forgot it dipped. Water already gathered there, turning the tracks slick and treacherous. She stepped around a puddle, caught her skirt on a low branch, freed it impatiently, and lost another precious minute. Thunder cracked nearer. This time she did not pretend indifference. The rain thickened until the world beyond a few yards blurred into grey. Elizabeth knew the parsonage lay behind her somewhere, but the route back was no longer as plain as it had been. She had turned too early or too late at the last fork. She was certain of it only after the certainty became useless. The sensible track, the one she had meant to follow, had disappeared into a confusion of trees and rain. She stopped, breathing hard. A flash of lightning lit the wood white for a single instant. In that stark brilliance she saw, off to the left and lower down, the outline of a small structure. A keeper's shed, perhaps, or one of the rough shelters used by men who tended the park. She remembered hearing Charlotte mention such places, though she had never had reason to seek one. Now she had every reason. Elizabeth gathered her skirts and hurried toward it. Branches scratched at her sleeves. The ground sucked at her shoes. Rain ran beneath the brim of her bonnet and down the side of her face. Another peal of thunder sounded directly overhead, so violent that she nearly stumbled. Pride, anger, Darcy, Jane, Wickham, all vanished beneath the immediate knowledge that she was alone in a storm and must reach shelter at once. The shed stood in a small clearing, rough-boarded, low-roofed, with a narrow porch scarcely worthy of the name. Smoke did not rise from its chimney. The door, when she reached it, resisted her first pull, swollen by damp. She seized the latch with both hands, braced her foot, and forced it open. She stepped inside, pushed the door shut against the wind, and leaned back against it, eyes closed in relief. Then a man said her name. Miss Bennet. Elizabeth's eyes flew open. Mr. Darcy stood across the small room, coat removed, cravat loosened, his dark hair wet from rain, and one sleeve clinging to his arm, as though he had been attempting to dry it by the fire. The fire itself was newly lit and smoked faintly, throwing uneven light over the rough walls, the small table, 2 chairs, a narrow bedstead, and the impossible fact of him. For several seconds neither moved. Then Elizabeth reached blindly for the latch behind her. "Do not open that door," Darcy said, and the urgency in his voice checked her more than the command. "The storm is directly above us." She turned the latch anyway. Wind shoved the door inward with such violence that rain swept across the floor. Darcy crossed the room in 2 strides and caught the edge before it struck her. He did not touch her, but the force of his presence, so close and so sudden, made her retreat at once. He shut the door and stepped back. "Forgive me," he said. Elizabeth stared at him, breath uneven, rain dripping from the ends of her ribbons. Of all the shelters in Kent, of all the men in England, fate had selected Fitzwilliam Darcy. The impropriety of the situation arrived before either of them named it. It stood between them more tangibly than the rough table, the smoking fire, or the rain hammering the roof. Elizabeth could feel it in the looseness of Darcy's cravat, in the damp state of her gown, in the solitude of the place, in the hour, in the knowledge that a servant, a tenant, a child gathering kindling, anyone, might open the door and construct from the sight a story neither innocence nor truth could unmake. "You must leave," she said. Darcy's expression, already grave, tightened. "I cannot. I did not ask whether it was convenient. No, you asked what would be dangerous." He glanced toward the small window, where rain ran in sheets over the cloudy glass. "The lightning is too near, and the trees are the worst place for either of us." "Then I shall leave." "You must not." Elizabeth's chin lifted. "Mr. Darcy, after last evening, I had hoped I made plain that I do not receive your instructions." Pain crossed his face so quickly she might have missed it had she not been watching him with every faculty sharpened by alarm. He bowed his head once. "You did," he said. "I have no right to instruct you. I can only tell you that the path is unsafe, and that if you go out now, I will be compelled by every principle of humanity to follow at a distance until I see you reach the parsonage. That would not reduce the impropriety. It would only add danger to it." The answer was reasonable. Elizabeth resented it for that. Rain beat against the roof. Water gathered beneath the door and crept over the threshold in a thin, shining line. "How came you here?" she asked. "I was caught in the same storm." "That much is evident. I mean, why were you in this part of the park?" Darcy's hand moved slightly toward his coat, which hung over the back of one chair. He arrested the motion. "I was walking." "Walking? How very unfortunate that Rosings contains so many paths, and yet we should select the same one. I assure you, Miss Bennet, I did not seek this meeting." The words struck too near her own suspicion, and embarrassment warmed her face despite the cold. "Nor did I." "I know." Something in his tone, quiet, without defence, robbed her of the sharp reply she had prepared. He did not look triumphant. He did not even look pleased. If anything, he looked as trapped as she felt. Only then did she notice that one side of his coat was dark with rain, and that his boots were muddied nearly to the top. A rough blanket lay folded on the bedstead. A second chair had been placed at a pointed distance from the first, as though he had arranged the room for solitude before she burst into it and made solitude impossible. Elizabeth became aware of her own condition. Her gown clung heavily to her skirts. Rain had soaked through her shawl and chilled her shoulders. The ribbon of her bonnet had loosened. One glove was torn where a branch had caught it. She was cold enough that her hands trembled, which irritated her because trembling could be mistaken for fear. Darcy saw it. To his credit, he did not immediately comment. Instead, he moved to the fire and adjusted one of the small logs with a poker. "The chimney draws poorly, but it will do better once warmed. You should stand nearer." "I am well enough. You are soaked through, and you are observant." His mouth tightened, though not quite in displeasure. "The fault is obvious. The fault, the wet, not yours." Silence fell, awkward and absurd. Elizabeth looked about the shed more deliberately. It was no proper cottage, only a place of utility. A shelf held a tin cup, a chipped bowl, a twist of paper that might contain salt, and an old knife. A small cupboard stood near the hearth. The bedstead was narrow and covered by a coarse blanket. There was no second room, no screen, no respectable solution to the fact that she and Mr. Darcy occupied the same enclosed space, while weather and propriety conspired against them. "We cannot remain here," she said, though the words had lost conviction. Darcy looked to the window again. "We may have no choice for some time." "There is always a choice." He turned back to her. "There is not always a safe one." Her eyes flashed. "You speak as though safety were the only consideration." "No, I am very aware it is not. That admission altered the room. It acknowledged the danger she had not wanted him to name. Not danger to life or limb, but to reputation, to her sisters, to every future conversation in which her name might be spoken with a pause before it. Elizabeth folded her arms to steady herself. If anyone should come, I will say the truth. The truth will not help us. No, Darcy said after a pause. Perhaps not. The honesty of that too was unwelcome. A violent gust shook the door. Elizabeth started despite herself. Darcy did not move toward her, but his attention sharpened. Thunder followed so quickly that the floor seemed to tremble beneath it. You should sit, he said. I prefer to stand. Then stand near the fire. She almost refused simply because he had suggested it, but cold water was running down the back of her neck, and obstinacy, though useful in argument, could not dry a gown. She crossed to the hearth, maintaining as much distance from him as the small room allowed. Darcy stepped away at once, giving her the place closest to the fire. He took the other side of the room and stood near the table, his hands behind his back, his posture formal enough for a drawing room and absurd enough for a shed. Elizabeth removed her wet gloves. Her fingers were stiff and red. She flexed them before the fire, watching steam begin to rise faintly from the hem of her gown. I suppose, she said, because silence with him was worse than speech. Lady Catherine would have much to say about this. Lady Catherine has much to say about everything. The reply was so dry and so unexpected from him that Elizabeth looked up. Their eyes met. For a dangerous second, amusement threatened. Then memory returned. His proposal, Jane Wickham, his arrogance, her refusal, the almost smile died. Darcy looked away first. I beg your pardon, he said. I should not jest. You believe I object to humour? I believe you object to me. There was no safe answer to that, because it was true and incomplete. Elizabeth turned her attention to the fire. You are correct that we cannot go out immediately, but as soon as the storm weakens, I shall return to the parsonage. Of course, and you will leave separately. Yes, and no one need know we were here together. Darcy hesitated only long enough for her to notice. What? She demanded. I was here before you. If I leave after you, and if anyone has observed either of us in this direction, questions may arise. Then you should leave first. If I leave first, and you are seen emerging from the shed alone, soaked and disordered after a storm, questions may also arise. She hated him for being right, though the hatred was directed less at him than at the world that made such calculations necessary. And what do you propose, that we wait until the rain lessens, then determine which path is least likely to be observed? That sounds very nearly like management. He accepted the rebuke without visible offence. Then let us call it caution, and you may correct the plan. That checked her again. The Mr. Darcy of last evening would not have invited correction, or perhaps he would have, if he believed himself already correct and merely awaited agreement. This man's composure seemed different, though she was not inclined to trust the difference. A shiver passed through her before she could suppress it. Darcy saw. Miss Bennet, no, I have not asked anything. You were about to recommend some sensible indignity. His brows drew together. I was about to say that there may be something dry in the cupboard. A cloak, perhaps, or another blanket. Oh. The small word escaped before pride could stop it. Darcy crossed to the cupboard with careful slowness, as though sudden movement might offend the air. He opened it and searched. There is a blanket, a rough one, also a shirt, and what may once have been a coat. Oh, I shall take the blanket. He lifted it out and placed it over the back of the chair nearest the fire, then retreated to the far side of the room and turned his back without being asked. Elizabeth looked at him, surprised despite herself. You may wrap it about your shoulders, he said. I will not turn. The gesture was proper. It was also painful, because it demanded gratitude from her when she wanted only to be angry. She removed her soaked shawl and bonnet, laid them near the hearth, and drew the blanket over her shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke and storage, but was dry. Warmth began, slowly, to collect around her. Oh, I am done, she said. Darcy turned back. His gaze flicked once to ensure she was covered, and then lifted to her face. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, only concern held in strict discipline. That discipline unsettled her more than arrogance would have done. "We shall wait," Elizabeth said. "Yes." The storm answered for him, loud against the roof, sealing them in. Time in the shed did not pass by minutes. It passed by sounds: rain on the roof, wind at the door, the hiss of damp wood in the hearth, thunder receding, then returning, the small occasional drip from the edge of Elizabeth's bonnet where it lay near the fire, Darcy's movements, careful and infrequent, as he searched the cupboard and shelf with the air of a man determined to make practical use of himself without crowding her. "There are potatoes," he said at last. Elizabeth looked up from the chair where she sat wrapped in the coarse blanket, her wet gown arranged as modestly as possible beneath it. "In a shed? I cannot account for the habits of the keeper. Perhaps he is more provident than either of us. That would not be difficult at present." Again, the faintest possibility of humour passed between them. Again, it did not survive long. Darcy set the potatoes on the table, then found a small pot, 2 cups, and a packet of tea, so old Elizabeth suspected it had seen several seasons. There was also a heel of bread wrapped in cloth, and a jar of something that might once have been preserves. The domesticity of the inventory was ridiculous and, for that reason, almost comforting. Catastrophe ought not to include potatoes. "Can you cook?" Elizabeth asked before she considered whether the question was impertinent. "No. At least you are honest. I can boil water. A skill not to be despised in present circumstances." He glanced toward her, then away, as though uncertain whether he was permitted to smile. "Then I shall be useful to that extent." Useful. Mr. Collins adored the word. In Darcy's mouth it sounded like penance. He filled the pot from a rain barrel beneath the porch, managing the task with a minimum of exposure, though he returned wetter than before. Elizabeth protested, despite herself. "You have made yourself worse. The coat will dry. That was not my meaning." "I know." The quiet answer disarmed her. She busied herself with the potatoes, taking the knife from the shelf and peeling them with fingers that had regained enough feeling to ache. Darcy put the pot on the hook over the fire. They worked around one another in a constrained silence that might almost have been cooperation, if not for everything unsaid. When the potatoes were cooking, and there was nothing left to do but wait, Darcy took his place at the table. Elizabeth remained near the hearth. The arrangement was absurdly formal. 2 people separated by 6 feet of rough floor, and an entire history of misjudgment. Darcy's coat hung near the fire. His waistcoat was damp but decent. His cravat, though retied, bore signs of haste. Elizabeth tried not to notice any of this. Noticing made the situation feel more real, and if it became real, she would have to consider what might follow. "What time do you think it is?" she asked. "A little past 1, perhaps." "So early?" "I fear so. The storm could not possibly last until night. It must pass." She clung to that certainty, though the rain continued with a determination that suggested no interest in her reputation. Darcy drew something from his coat pocket, paper. He looked at it, then placed it on the table, still folded and sealed. Elizabeth's attention fixed upon it, despite herself. "A letter?" "Yes, for Lady Catherine." "No." The single syllable carried more weight than it ought. Elizabeth understood before he said more, and her body stiffened beneath the blanket. "For me?" "Yes." She stood. "Mr. Darcy, I will not force it upon you." He rose as well, but only because she had done so, and immediately stopped. "I wrote it after I left you last evening. It concerns the charges you laid against me. I had hoped— No, that is not the right word. I intended to give it to you when I could do so without imposing upon your time. You thought to defend yourself. I thought to tell you what you had a right to know. Did my refusal not persuade you that I wanted no further conversation? It did. It should have." He looked down at the letter. "But some part of what you believe rests upon falsehood, and silence would leave others vulnerable to that falsehood." "Others?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." Elizabeth thought of Wickham then, of his ease and charm, of the story he had told her beneath the appearance of injured openness. She thought of Darcy's coldness toward him and his refusal to explain. She thought of Jane. Her anger, tired of having no new ground to conquer, rallied at once. "And am I to suppose," she said, "that the letter proves every accusation mistaken?" No, that was not the answer she expected. Darcy met her eyes. "It does not. My conduct regarding Bingley and your sister was based on judgment I believed sound." I now understand that certainty and justice are not always the same thing. Elizabeth's fingers tightened on the blanket. That is a convenient discovery after the harm is done. Yes, the word fell without defence. It should have satisfied her. Instead it unsettled her, because argument required resistance, and he gave her none. As for Mr. Wickham, Darcy continued, I cannot allow his account to stand unchallenged. You cannot allow it. I cannot, because it is untrue. The fire snapped. Rain rushed over the roof. Elizabeth looked at the letter as though it might open of its own accord and spill poison, truth or both. This is neither the time nor the place, she said. No. Darcy took the letter and returned it to his coat pocket. It is not. I apologise for raising it. Again, restraint. Again, withdrawal, where she had expected insistence. Elizabeth sat slowly. The smell of cooking potatoes filled the shed. It was plain, humble, and entirely unsuited to the grand emotions that had brought them to this strange confinement. After some time, Darcy removed the pot from the fire and divided its contents between the two chipped bowls. He offered one to her without approaching too near. She accepted, because pride had no argument against hunger. They ate in near silence. The soup, if such it could be called, was underseasoned, unevenly cooked, and among the most welcome meals Elizabeth had ever taken. Warmth moved from her hands into her chest. Her gown no longer clung quite so miserably. The storm still raged, but the immediate fear of freezing had receded. With that relief came the return of more complicated fears. What if the rain does not stop? She asked. Darcy set down his bowl. It will. That is hope, not knowledge. Yes. She looked toward the window. It was now so dark with rain and cloud that it might have been evening. Charlotte will worry. Mrs. Collins may assume you took shelter elsewhere. Mr. Collins will assume something far less charitable if he discovers I am absent too long. Darcy's face changed at once. He had considered reputation in general. Now, she saw, he considered Mr. Collins in particular. The change was not reassuring. Would he search? He enjoys duty. That does not answer me. It answers you precisely. Darcy rose and went to the window. He did not attempt to look out for long. There was little to see. The storm is still too heavy for anyone to search effectively. For now. Neither spoke the rest. The afternoon wore on. Once the rain seemed to lessen, only to return with greater force. Twice Elizabeth moved toward the door, and twice Darcy, without command, opened it enough for them both to see that the path had become a channel of mud and water. Lightning remained close enough to make departure foolish. She hated that word. Foolish. It was one thing to be brave, another to be reckless, and she had always prided herself on knowing the difference. Now the difference imprisoned her. As the light failed, Darcy used what remained of the wood sparingly. He found another blanket in the cupboard, older and thinner than hers, and placed it near her chair. You will need it, he said. What of you? I have my coat. Your coat is damp. It is less damp than your gown. You cannot intend to sit all night in wet clothes. I do not intend anything if we can avoid the night. But they both knew, as dusk gathered, that avoidance was no longer within their power. The shed altered when darkness came. By day it had been improper. By night it became dangerous in every social sense Elizabeth understood. A woman might be trapped by weather at 1 hour and ruined by narrative at another. What had been accident in the afternoon would become evidence by morning. Darcy seemed to feel the change too. He arranged the chairs with exaggerated distance, fed the fire, and then stood as though uncertain where his body might be least offensive. There is the bed, he said at last, each word measured. You should take it. Elizabeth's heart struck hard once. No, I will sit by the door. No, Miss Bennet, I am not suggesting. I know what you are suggesting. I will not take the bed while you sit in wet clothes by a door in a storm. His expression flickered. Your consideration does you credit, but it is unnecessary. It is not consideration. It is sense. Then allow sense to include your health and yours. I am accustomed to discomfort. That is the sort of statement made by men who expect to be admired for enduring what might have been avoided. For the first time since the storm began, Darcy looked almost amused. You are severe, Miss Bennet. I am cold, tired, and trapped in a shed with a man who last night insulted me in the act of proposing marriage. Severity is the least of what you should expect. The amusement vanished, replaced by something more solemn. You are right. She wished he would stop saying that. In the end, necessity made an arrangement neither liked. Elizabeth took the chair nearest the fire with both blankets. Darcy took the other chair near the door, his coat drawn about him, his posture rigid enough to satisfy a committee of chaperones had any been present to approve it. The bed remained unused between them, a narrow symbol of all that had not happened and might still be presumed. They did not sleep soon. Elizabeth watched the fire diminish and flare. She heard Darcy shift only when stiffness overcame his discipline. Once she opened her eyes to find him looking not at her, but at the door, as though he could keep danger outside by attention alone. "Mr. Darcy," she said softly. He turned at once. "Yes, if we are found, we will say the truth. The truth will not be enough." "No." "What then?" He was silent for a long moment. "Then I will do whatever honour requires to protect you." The words should have reassured her. Instead, they chilled her more deeply than the wet gown had done. Honour, in a man like Darcy, might be a shield. It might also be a cage. Elizabeth closed her eyes. Across the room, Darcy remained awake long after her breathing slowed, listening to the storm and to his own conscience, and understanding too late that some necessities are born not from desire, nor even from duty, but from the world's merciless readiness to believe the worst of a woman. Morning entered the shed without brightness. It came as a thinning of darkness, a greying of the window, a less violent note in the rain. Elizabeth woke slowly, stiff in every limb, with the coarse blanket heavy around her and the taste of smoke in her mouth. For a few merciful seconds, she did not remember where she was. Then she saw the rough wall, the small hearth, the unused bedstead, and Mr. Darcy seated near the door with his head bowed and his arms folded beneath his coat. The entire night returned. She sat upright too quickly. The chair creaked. Darcy woke at once, or perhaps he had never fully slept. His eyes found hers, alert and grave. "Good morning," he said. The absurd civility of it nearly made her laugh or cry. She was not certain which impulse had the advantage. "Is it?" she asked. He did not pretend to misunderstand. "The rain has lessened." Elizabeth rose, gathering the blanket around her. Her gown was still damp in places, but no longer soaked. Her hair, despite every pin, had loosened at the temples. She knew she must look wretched. Darcy looked scarcely better, though his disarray had the unfair advantage of appearing severe rather than vulnerable. "We should leave at once," she said. Yes, neither moved for one breath, then both did. Darcy reached for his coat properly. Elizabeth collected her bonnet and shawl. The shawl was cold and unpleasant, but she could not return to the parsonage wrapped in a keeper's blanket. Her fingers shook as she tied her bonnet ribbons. Darcy noticed and looked away. That small courtesy almost undid her. "How far are we from the parsonage?" she asked. "By the direct path, perhaps 20 minutes, longer in the mud. And from Rosings, a little less. Then you should go first toward Rosings. I will wait and then return by the lower path. The lower path may be flooded, then the upper. The upper is more visible from the lane. Mr. Darcy." Her patience frayed. "Every path cannot be impossible." "No. Forgive me. You are right. We must choose." Before they could choose, the latch lifted. Elizabeth froze. The door opened inward, slowly at first, then with greater force as the swollen wood gave way. Grey morning and damp air entered together. In the doorway stood Mr. Collins, umbrella in hand, boots muddied, face arranged in the solemn triumph of a man who has found calamity and already assigned himself the role of Providence. Behind him, at a little distance, one of Rosings' undergardeners hovered with visible curiosity. Mr. Collins' eyes moved from Darcy to Elizabeth, from Elizabeth's loosened hair to the blankets, from the dead fire to the unused but present bed, and then back again to Darcy. For once in his life, he appeared unable to speak. Then he found his voice. "Cousin Elizabeth." No sermon, no compliment to Lady Catherine, no elaborate address could have sounded worse than those two words. Elizabeth's hand tightened around the back of the chair. "Mr. Collins." Darcy stepped forward at once, placing himself not before her entirely. He was careful even then not to make her invisible, but near enough that Collins's attention shifted to him. "Mr. Collins, you will send that man away." The authority in his voice was quiet and absolute. The gardener, needing no further encouragement, withdrew several steps, though not so far that Elizabeth could trust his ears. Mr. Collins blinked. "Mr. Darcy, I am sure you comprehend. Indeed, I am persuaded you must comprehend the very grave, very delicate, very distressing nature of the circumstances in which I find you and my cousin." "I comprehend it perfectly." Elizabeth looked at Darcy sharply. "Mr. Collins drew himself up, reassured by the sound of his own office. "As the clergyman of this parish, and as the husband of Mrs. Collins, under whose roof Miss Elizabeth has been residing, I must regard myself as peculiarly responsible. Peculiarly. Lady Catherine has often impressed upon me that negligence in matters of female propriety is a failure not merely of manners, but of moral guardianship." "Mr. Collins," Elizabeth said, finding her voice though it felt borrowed, "the storm forced both Mr. Darcy and me to take shelter here. Nothing improper occurred." Mr. Collins's expression combined pity and disbelief in proportions that made Elizabeth's cheeks burn. "My dear cousin, I would not willingly distress you by unnecessary contradiction. Nevertheless, the world does not inquire what has occurred when appearances have already spoken." "The world is unjust," Elizabeth said. "Undoubtedly, which is why virtuous persons must be scrupulous in avoiding occasions for misinterpretation." Darcy's voice cut through the reply before Elizabeth could answer. "There will be no occasion for public misinterpretation." Mr. Collins turned to him, almost eagerly. "Then you acknowledge—" "I acknowledge that Miss Bennet's reputation must be protected." Elizabeth's heart began to beat too quickly. Darcy looked at her once. In that look was apology before action, regret before necessity, and a question he had no time to ask. Then he turned back to Collins. "Miss Bennet and I are engaged to be married." The shed seemed to lose all air. Elizabeth stared at him. Mr. Collins' mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "Engaged? Yes. To be married?" Darcy's expression did not alter. That is the meaning of the word. Even in horror, Elizabeth might have laughed had the consequences not been so immense. Mr. Collins looked to her. "Cousin Elizabeth." She could deny it. The thought flashed bright and wild. She could say no. She could tell the truth, that Darcy had proposed and she had refused him, that no engagement existed, that the night had been accident and misery and nothing more. She could preserve her honesty and lose everything else because Collins would not believe silence. The gardener had seen enough to wonder. Lady Catherine would hear. Longbourn would hear. Jane would suffer for her. Lydia and Kitty would be marked by her disgrace. Her father's wit would not protect them. Her mother's nerves would worsen every whisper. Wickham, oh, Wickham would know how to smile over such a tale. Darcy had lied. Darcy had lied to save her. That did not make it less a trap. "Yes," Elizabeth said, and the word felt like a door closing. "Mr. Darcy and I are engaged." Darcy's face remained composed, but something in his eyes changed. Pain, perhaps, or gratitude, or the recognition that he had just bound them both to a future neither had chosen together. Mr. Collins inhaled deeply, gathering importance from the very air. "This is indeed a most unexpected development. Most unexpected. I must say, Cousin Elizabeth, that your reserve upon the subject does you little credit, though maidenly modesty may account for some part of the omission." Elizabeth said nothing. Speech seemed dangerous. "Mr. Collins continued, warming to his role. "Mr. Darcy, while an engagement may alter the complexion of the event, it does not erase the irregularity. An engaged couple is not a married couple. Lady Catherine has expressed herself most strongly on such distinctions, and as you are her nephew, you must be sensible that the honour of distinguished families cannot be exposed to idle conjecture." "No idle conjecture will be permitted," Darcy said. "Precisely. Then the remedy is clear." Elizabeth's fingers went cold. Darcy's face hardened. "What remedy?" "Marriage." Mr. Collins said it with relish, dressed as duty. "Immediate marriage, or as immediate as the law and ecclesiastical procedure will allow. A special licence, I imagine, may be procured, considering your position. The ceremony should take place before any whisper can travel." "That is not for you to decide," Elizabeth said. Mr. Collins turned upon her with the mournful firmness of a man enjoying reluctant authority. My dear cousin, I sympathize with the delicacy natural to your sex, but you must allow those better acquainted with the world's judgments to act. You are under my roof. Your father entrusted you to the care of my household. I cannot return you to him with your reputation subject to dispute. My father did not entrust me to be disposed of. No one speaks of disposal. Mr. Collins looked offended. We speak of preservation. Darcy's hand flexed once at his side. Mr. Collins, you will not address Miss Bennet as though she were an object in a parish inventory. The rebuke startled Collins. It startled Elizabeth too. Darcy did not raise his voice, but his authority filled the small room more effectively than anger would have done. Mr. Collins recovered with a stiff bow. I meant no disrespect. Indeed, I am motivated entirely by respect. For Miss Elizabeth, for yourself, for Lady Catherine, for the sacred institution of marriage, and for the reputations of all families concerned. All families, Elizabeth repeated. Yes, your sisters, for instance. There it was. Not threat in the theatrical sense. Worse, truth wielded by a fool. Darcy turned slightly toward her. Miss Bennet. She could not bear the gentleness of his voice. Do not, he stopped at once. That obedience, small and immediate, told her he understood. Perhaps not the whole of her humiliation, but enough to know that another word from him might break something she needed intact. Mr. Collins looked between them with the avid concern of a man who would recount every detail to himself later as evidence of his prudence. I shall escort Cousin Elizabeth to the parsonage, he declared. Mr. Darcy, I trust you will return to Rosings and make the necessary arrangements. I shall write to Mr. Bennet immediately and inform Lady Catherine with all possible discretion. No, Darcy said. Mr. Collins stiffened. No. You will not inform Lady Catherine before I have spoken to her. As her clergyman, as my aunt's clergyman, you owe her respect. As a gentleman, you owe Miss Bennet discretion. Mr. Collins flushed. Naturally discretion is my aim, yet I must consider my duty. Then consider this your first duty. Say nothing to the servant who came with you. Send him back by another path. You found us after the storm. Miss Bennet and I were already engaged. You are now assisting in the proper regularization of a marriage that was intended. That is all any person need know. Elizabeth listened, horrified by how quickly a story could be built. Not entirely false, not entirely true. Strong enough, perhaps, to save her. Strong enough, certainly, to imprison her. Mr. Collins considered this. Its formality appealed to him, its secrecy less so. And the wedding? As soon as proper arrangements can be made, Darcy said. Within days. Darcy did not answer. Mr. Collins seized the silence. Within days, Mr. Darcy. I must insist. I am not a man to be negligent where reputation is at stake. Elizabeth almost said that he was precisely such a man whenever reputation could be converted into self-importance, but she had no strength for it. The rain outside softened to a steady patter. The storm had passed. Too late. Mr. Collins stepped back from the doorway and made an elaborate gesture toward the path. Cousin Elizabeth, if you are ready. Ready. Elizabeth looked once around the shed. The dead fire, the chipped bowls, the bed they had not used, the chairs that had preserved honour and would prove nothing. Then she looked at Darcy. He bowed, deeply and formally, as though she were already more than Miss Bennet, and not yet what he had made inevitable. I am sorry, he said, too softly for Collins to hear. Elizabeth's throat tightened. She wanted to say she hated him. She wanted to say he had saved her. She wanted to say necessity was a cruel word, because it made victims sound reasonable. Instead, she lifted her chin and walked past him into the grey morning. Behind her, Mr. Collins began speaking of duty before they had gone 10 paces. Elizabeth heard none of it clearly. She heard only the shutting of the shed door and understood that some other door had shut with it. She had refused Mr. Darcy once, now the world intended to answer for her.